Join me with my first ever attempt at papermaking. This is the result, but stay tuned for the trials and errors. So the first thing that we have to start with when making paper is paper. Luckily, I've been saving up, and I'm sure, like me, you probably get a bunch of junk mail, and all I've done is shred this, but we're going to need it to be even finer if we're going to make our own paper out of it, and that's where this bad boy comes in. This is a blender that I inherited from, I guess, my nan or my granddad, and I don't even know if it's ever been used, but it's definitely been sat in the cupboard for quite some time, so I'm happy to use this for crafts. It's not going to be used for food or anything like that. I'm going to keep it completely separate, but what we're essentially going to do is make a paper mulch by blending a bunch of this with a bunch of water, and then we're going to water it down even further before putting it on some sheets to make the paper. And luckily, and sort of shockingly for British summertime, there is a big fiery ball in the sky outside, so I might even be able to craft outside today. So to start with, I'm just going to put a bunch of water in here and a handful of paper. I don't think it matters if you put too much water in, but the main thing is to try and get it as smooth as possible so that the end paper that we make at the end doesn't end up too bumpy, unless that's the look you're going for. So I'm going to go to a time lapse, but I'm essentially just going to be adding paper and water in, emptying it out, paper and water in, until we end up with a paper slurry that we can make our own. So just a side note to say that I'm not being particularly choosy when it comes to which paper I'm throwing in. So because there's a sort of blend of colours, it will probably end up being a grey or a brownish colour. If you do want to aim for a particular colour, you'd have to be way more choosy with what you put in. Obviously, when you blend it all up, it's just going to mix together all the colours, and that's going to be what your end paper is going to be. As I said, I'm just adding water and shredded paper and blending it until it feels like it's done. Every now and then I'll add a bit more water or paper or stop the mixer to unstick any bits from the sides. My end result was this grey looking paper porridge. Not perfect, but I think it will work. Next time I think I'd pre-soak the paper, probably overnight, and likely stick blend the pulp after it's gone through this processor to make it less lumpy. I just do this a few more times to make sure that I have enough pulp, and then I'll see you outside. I managed to make it outside while the big fiery ball was still out, and I'm just going to give you an overview of the equipment I'll be using. First is my bucket of paper porridge. I also have an old bed sheet which is used for drying, a very inquisitive cat, some mesh frames which is how we form the paper sheets, you'll see these used very soon. I've also got a few extras like seeds and petals that I've dried, some pegs which will be used with the off-camera aero, and finally this tub which I'm going to pour the pulp into and then add more water to thin it out. I might also try to move our little visitor so she doesn't get covered in paper pulp. As you can see, the pulp is still a little lumpy, but it is now way more watery. So now what I do is grab one of these meshes, tip it in, drain off the water, try and smooth it out a bit, add any of these that I want to, but the first one I think I'm just going to give it a go and see how it happens. The pulp is still quite thick, but I'm aiming for a thick paper, so I think it should be okay. But here we go. My first few tries ended up way too thick, but the good part is that if it doesn't come out right, you can just throw it back in the tub and try again. My pulp was definitely a little bit chunky, and for my first attempts I had the mesh at too much of an angle, and the paper ends up way more even if the mesh is basically flat when it comes out of the tub. So my videos are a mix of crafts that I've done lots of times before and ones that I'm trying for the very first time. I like to show my initial attempts for new crafts, as I think often we only get to see them when things go well, and obviously that usually takes a bit of practice. I've watched other videos about paper making and done some initial research, but this is my first physical attempt. By sharing this, I hope to tackle some issues that you might come across if you try out this craft. I decided to let the paper soak for a little while I stepped away and thought about how to approach it. My first attempt after this came out okay, and then I grabbed a sponge, which I previously forgot to mention, and tried to dab away some of the extra moisture. This sheet was still pretty thick, but it was way more even than my previous attempts. I got these mesh frames from Shein, and I do think that usually papermaking frames have two parts so you get a better edge. I might look into getting one of those if I do try this again. I did try using two frames of the same size, but it just didn't work. I also think my sponging technique here is all wrong. Sponging it straight after pulling it out of the tub just ended up breaking up the paper. Once I had a relatively even layer, it was time to head over to the bedsheet and try to take out more water, so I'll see you over there. I've tried to lay the bedsheet out as flat as possible, and I'll try again to gently sponge away some more moisture. Any moisture I remove now will drastically reduce the drying time. I then flip the frame and the paper pulp comes away from the mesh, leaving the sheet of paper on the bedsheet. This one ended up almost cardboard thick, so I make a mental note to try and get it thinner next time. One idea I mentioned earlier was adding seeds into the paper. This way we can make a plantable paper. I just tear open a packet and spread the seeds in a definitely perfectly even way, and then pat them down a bit to embed them into the paper, and then flip the mesh. This time it stuck to the mesh slightly and I was left with a bit of a wonky sheet. For the petals I try the same technique as the seeds. I didn't realise how unflat these petals were, and next time I definitely press them first. I do think this could be a great idea for wedding thank you notes. You could dry and press wedding flowers and incorporate them into the paper. When I flipped it, it became obvious that the petals not being flat is going to be a big problem, but we'll see how these turn out. My paper did get gradually thinner and smoother, and I got way faster at making them. It may have helped that the lumpier bit sunk to the bottom of the tub, so when skimming the top it was only the really fine pulp that ended up on the mesh. If you're a papermaking expert, please leave any hints or tips in the comments below. Once I had a few sheets, it was time to attempt to hang them on the airer. This is where I realised that I definitely should have cut the bedsheet up before putting any paper on it. The idea is to have pieces of bedsheet slightly larger than the mesh screen so that you can flip the paper onto them and then hang up individual sheets, meaning that they dry quicker and flatter than if you left them on the surface. I also tried to use the sponge after flipping the paper but through the mesh. This seemed to work a lot better and I got a lot of water out using this method. After a few attempts there were some things that I did to make the process easier. Simple things like adding the pegs to the airer in advance so I was doing less juggling, cutting up the sheet in advance, and this one I admit is pretty obvious in hindsight, and using a chopping board under the sheets to ensure they stay as flat as possible and they're easier to pick up. So here are my finished sheets of paper. I did have to finish drying them inside, but I mean, being able to craft outside is a bit of a luxury in the UK anyway, so what I'm going to do is just go through and attempt to peel the paper off of these sheets without roughing it too much. I'll probably start with the, should we say, less pristine looking ones, and then hopefully by the time I get to the good ones I will have a bit of a technique down, but I think this should theoretically be the easy part. Overall, I'm pretty impressed for my first time. I have actually made paper. It feels like paper. If I take one, I don't mind ripping. It's already broken. It tears just like paper. It definitely looks like recycled paper, but it dried a lot sort of brighter, almost white. So I don't think using the different coloured paper mattered too much as long as most of it was white. If I did this again, I would definitely, if I want to use the petals again, I would flatten the petals first, because that definitely led to a few issues in the paper. And yeah, I think if the petals were flat and I put them on after I did the sort of sieving bit, that would work a lot better. And the seeds, I kind of think the same. I should have did the sieving bit and then sprinkled them on a little more evenly than I did. But I think this will still work as plantable paper, so maybe I'll try that again. But overall, I think it worked pretty well. They are quite bobbly, but I think I could flatten them out if I had put them under some books for a little while. But yeah, this was my first ever time, so I'm pretty impressed with how it went. And even the ones I thought were a bit thick aren't actually too bad. The paper itself is a bit more flexible than I thought it would be. I thought it might not be able to bend and it would just sort of tear or snap. so I might still be able to do what I was initially planning with this and potentially make greeting cards or thank you cards. I do like the specks of different colours in that the shredded paper gives it. You can see occasional little letters and things, so maybe in future I would maybe stick blend the paper mulch after I put it through the food processor, because I think that would give a nice sort of smoother finish to the paper as well. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with this. As I said, if I try it again, I'd probably try to press the flowers first, maybe try the plantable paper again, and I've seen that people add sort of drips of ink to dye it and give you cool sort of tie-dye paper effects. If there's anything that you'd be interested in me trying, let me know in the comments below. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching and hope to see you again soon. Now, what do I do with this?